This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Cry Havoc. From New York Times #1 bestselling author, Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reese thriller. Order now.
If you saw a bunch of people outside the mosque descending on a guy in a blue shirt,
oh wow,
and almost staring him limb from limb, that was me.
Oh,
I mean, and that was a very intense, obviously, moment in my life, and it definitely led into The Faithful Spy. Like that book could not have been written without being in Iraq, and I think without sort of that day.
Alex, how are you?
I'm good.
Oh, man, it's great to see you.
It's funny, this will be good. This is like a blast from the past.
Exactly what I was hoping for. I know you're, especially over the last 5 years, but really 6, you've been asked about a lot of things and less about these amazing 12 novels that you wrote, some of which while you were at the New York Times, and then the half of them, I think, when you were attached still as a contributor. And I want to ask you about all of this, but I'm so excited to talk to you about this because I've seen you so much over the last 5-6 years, but no one ever asked you about this anymore.
No, and it is funny because, I get about an email every 3 to 4 days from somebody who says, are you going to write another Wells novel? Like, what happened? And people still find them. It's sort of surprising to me because they're not really in bookstores. Like, they're not, at least not in Barnes and Noble. And obviously I haven't written one in a while, and I haven't written a novel since 2021, when The Power Couple came out. And yet people still want them. There are people who are like, I was a fan from the beginning. I've read them 3 times and I want them. And then there's people who are just like, I just found them. And like, are you going to go back? So yeah, I'd love to like talk about it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. This is so exciting for me because I found you right when this came out in 2006. Because we're almost exactly the same age, and I'm about 10 years into my time in the military. I've been a reader my whole life. My mom's a librarian, so I grew up surrounded by books and a love of reading. I know I'm going to write thrillers when I get out of the military, but I still have 10 years to go. And then I see you doing it. And having been to Iraq for the Times twice, I believe, and I want to ask you about that as well. But so all of that really resonated with me. And then on top of all of that, these are fantastic. I mean, you crushed it with these, and out of the gate, they were huge. And that's why people still find them today, because the product, the writing, the stories, the character, so fantastic. So people are going to find them and then want more, and people are going to find, whatever book they find, and they're going to go back to the beginning and go all the way through, and then they're going to send you that email.
Yep. Well, let's do it.
Yeah. Well, let's take it back a little bit further than The Faithful Spy, and talk about what drew you to journalism. Did you grow up with some sort of an influence where you knew, because I think you went to Yale and I think you studied history and economics or something like that, but did you know that you were going into journalism at some point?
I didn't really. There were a couple of things that drew me. First of all, I have a big mouth. Obviously on Twitter, it's clear I have a big mouth, and that was always true. And at Yale, the first year I was there, a student got killed. He got shot and killed, and it was a pretty terrible event for the campus. You know, he was just walking around. It was at night, and it was, you know, sort of a random shooting. His name was Christian Prince.
I remember this.
I mean, I talk about a redolent name, but and there, you know, there were a lot of rumors on campus. There was a lot of fear, and the newspapers. There was a newspaper called the Yale Daily News, and then there was a newspaper called the Yale Herald. They did a lot to try to, you know, calm people down and give people a place to mourn, and it actually was helpful. And you know, it showed me like there could be something positive in journalism. And then, you know, I graduated. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and you know, I mean, a lot of people go to law school from a place like Yale, or maybe they go to Wall Street or whatever. I didn't really want to do any of those things. And the appeal of journalism is that, I mean, certainly back then, if you could get to a paper, and I got to the Denver Post, pretty solid paper, you know, and it was before the internet and Craigslist destroyed, you know, sort of regional newspapers like the Denver Post. You could, it wasn't that you were making a lot of money, but you could make enough money to live. And it was a very kind of flat structure, right? As a reporter, you know, I was like 22 at one point. I remember I was in the governor's office, the governor of Colorado, interviewing, right? And that was my normal job, but still, like, that's what I was doing. And so you can rise pretty fast. And I think I mean, not so much anymore because so much has changed with journalism, but that's a seductive thing. What you don't realize is the flip side is that, you know, the person 3 years behind you can rise just as fast. It's a very competitive field, you know, because it's not really credentialed in the same way that, you know, that a lot of other professional fields are. But so I liked it. And I was very fortunate. You know, the 90s were a really good time to be a reporter. They were a good time. You know, the economy was good. The stock market was good. I think people were pretty generally optimistic, and the internet was just starting. And I could sort of see that the internet was going to be a big thing. And I went to work for an internet startup called TheStreet.com. And then I got to the Times by the time I was, 20, just before I turned 27, which, you know, I was very fortunate. No way around it. I broke some good stories at TheStreet.com, and the Times hired me as a business reporter. And I had a very entertaining and exciting 10 years at the Times, mostly doing business stuff, but doing some foreign correspondent work too. I did go to Iraq a couple times for the paper. I went to New Orleans after Katrina. You know, I really enjoyed my time at the Times, and I avoided some of the Washington, you know, listen, there are people who love Washington reporting, but it's a political cesspool. It was then, it's worse now. I didn't want to do that. I didn't do that. The only thing I didn't really do at the Times that I think would have been interesting was be my own foreign correspondence, or, you know, at like a bureau, you know, not in Iraq. I was a junior person in a big bureau, but, you know, being in wherever, Rio or, you know, or Cape Town or whatever, you know, that would have been exciting. And I never did do that. But I like the time. And it's funny because, you know, I won't jump ahead to COVID too much, but, you know, when I became
I'll get there.
People were like, oh, the Times fired him. It's like, no, what happened was the novels took off. And I actually spent my last year at the Times working half-time trying to see if I could write while still working for the paper. And it was not possible. And so then the books were a much better bet economically. And I like doing it. So that's why I left.
Amazing. So when you decide you want to be a journalist and you get to Denver, before you get there, do you already have your sights set on the Times? Is that something that a lot of journalists want to do, especially at that time? Like, you want to get to the New York Times, the Post maybe, but the New York Times is the one, especially then, that people kind of aspire to, it seems. Was that an early goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what, you know, actually, unfortunately, because of the changes in the business, the Times is it stands alone even more than any of the others used to. I mean, it used to be, there was the Times, and then you could make a case for the Wall Street Journal as, you know, the joke used to be the Times was read by people who think they run the country. The Journal is read by the people who actually run the country. there's the Wall Street Journal, and since I wrote a lot about business, that was interesting to me. There's Washington Post, obviously Washington, the center of the government. That's an important paper, and the LA Times was an important paper. But these days it really is the Times and everybody else. Look, when the Times showed interest in me, I was not going to say no. That's for sure.
Yeah. Did they reach out to you, or did you meet someone there who says, "Hey, you might be a good fit for this place at some point," or how did that work?
I can't remember. I mean, it's a long time ago now. I applied. I think that I applied, but I'd written these like investigative pieces. There's a company that's long gone now called Telsave. This is so long ago. Telsave was in the long distance business, which of course doesn't exist anymore. And they were sort of a shady but publicly traded company that engaged in a lot of slamming. You remember slamming, where you'd get your long distance service changed and then you couldn't change it back. And so slamming and cramming, there's all this stuff that again does not happen anymore because there's no such thing as long distance anymore. And so I had written these stories about Telsave, and the guy who ran it, who's dead now, is named Dan Borislaw, and he was like a drug user, and he should not have been running a publicly traded company. And they then like started following me. They hired a company called Kroll, which then hired. This was one of the revelations that I had as a 26-year-old reporter, is that private investigative services, at least in New York State, can hire off-duty cops and detectives to do surveillance, which still stuns me because let's say that person finds evidence of a crime. Do they go to their private investigative employer, or do they go to the NYPD with it? Anyway, these guys followed me around for a couple of days. It was not really dangerous, but it was scary, and it did make for a good story. And at some point, the Times, either I told the Times business editor that this had happened, or he found out it had happened. And, it definitely helped me get hired. So my joke with this was that Dan Borislaw got his $300 million from Telsave, and I got a job at the Times. We were both satisfied with what happened.
Oh, and all your stuff is still up there on the Times. If people go, they can read it all. It's all fantastic. I mean, you did so much there, from pharmaceutical industry investigations to Bernie Madoff to book reviews. You wove a couple of your own in there, I noticed, which was I love that. That was just fantastic. And I was curious because I was going to guess that you were inspired to follow this path into journalism due to popular culture because of the Times, which were our formative years. And I was going to be curious if you watched Fletch or something like that, or All the President's Men on VHS or something like that.
I mean, All the President's Men definitely was. That was. I think. I mean, it's so. Journalism felt so powerful at that time, and feels completely different now. But there was a moment, and my stories, a couple of them, and I am proud of them. Not that I go back and read them, but sometimes I'm looking for something, and I'm like, wow, I wrote about that 20 years ago, and the story still holds up. But there's a moment when you're doing investigative work, and you realize that it's great if you do it. I think this is even more true now than it was then. But that if the prosecutors and sort of the criminal apparatus doesn't get involved, then, the story isn't going to have as much impact as you hoped. Now these days where the media sort of at open war, with half the country saying maybe more, it's definitely a different, the dynamic is different. I mean, I never felt pressure. People do ask me this sometimes to write stuff or shade stuff politically, because I was doing business reporting. I was doing corporate investigative work, right? And so, I don't think of that as particularly Democratic or Republican. You can say, well, it's Democratic, you're chasing big companies and rich people, or you can say it's Republican, you're trying to make the stock markets work better and business perform better by getting the truth out. But I never really thought of it that way. I do remember when I came back from Iraq in 2003, I happened to be in Las Vegas, and for some reason I was getting my shoes shined. And this guy I was sitting next to, you get in your shoe side, it takes 10 minutes or whatever. Right? The guy sitting next to me says, "Oh, you work for the New York Times." I said, so what do you do? So I work for the New York Times. He said, "Oh, that must be terrible having to make stuff up that they tell you to make up." And I said, "Listen, dude, I just got back from Iraq. Okay. I was like risking my life. And I really was. It was dangerous. So, right. And I wasn't doing it to make things up, to try to make, the Bush administration look bad or whatever. Like that was not the goal. And that was not the goal when I was at the New York Times. I feel like, unfortunately, for too many of the reporters who are there now, it is the goal. Not to make things up, but to sort of make Donald Trump look bad by any means necessary. And that, that's been a bad thing, I think, for the Times. It's been a bad thing for reporting. It's been a bad thing for the country.
Yeah. All right, this is Jack Carr checking in from Park City, Utah. Hello, everybody out there at SIG Next. I wish I could be there with you. I was just finishing up my latest novel, Cry Havoc, which hits shelves on October 7th. And last year at SIG Next, I was so honored to be able to introduce the 40th anniversary edition of the P226 right here. And if you followed me for more than a day, then you know how fond I am of this pistol. I used it for my entire 20 years in the SEAL teams. It was by my side on every single deployment. Even when I had to put my M4 down, I always had my 226 Mark 25 variant, sometimes right there at the ready. And this year, I am also honored once again to be able to introduce the next evolution of the P226, and that is this pistol right here. It is the P226X Legion. Oh, that feels good. Dare I say it might feel better than the original. It comes in both a full-size edition with a 4.4-inch barrel and a carry-size edition with a 3.8-inch barrel. Both sizes are available in double-action, single-action with the iconic P226 decocking lever. The new P226X Legion has a new X-Series alloy frame with an even more ergonomic design with a deep undercut below the trigger guard and an extended beaver tail with an enhanced grip angle for an even more balanced feel in your hand. Both sizes have a full-length dust cover and rail on the front for a classic modern look. One of the biggest additions to the new P226X Legion is the amazing trigger, which is now adjustable in all models, giving you a smooth, crisp, customizable feel. Both the full and carry size have the bull barrels, just like the legendary X5 editions, making them extremely accurate. All models are optics ready with a removable sight plate, which has a pro footprint. These two are fitted with SIG's Romeo X optics. The all-new P226X Legion series, the next chapter in the history of this incredible pistol. This pistol feels good. Still feels like it's an extension of my hand. And this right here, this just might end up being the new carry. Yeah, I could do some good work with this. Love it. What stories stand out to you when you look back? Because when I was going through that list on the Times, there was a lot on Pfizer, Merrick, a lot on Madoff, and then there's one-offs all over the place. They're all fantastic, by the way. But what story stands out to you that when you think back on those times, maybe the first one that jumps to mind, or one that was impactful to you, or that surprised you even?
Some of the pharmaceutical stuff, but putting all the pharmaceutical stuff in one basket. A story I wrote about Taser, which was in 2004, one of the first. USA Today had done an investigation, but my story was really the first big story besides theirs, so maybe the second, about Taser and about just these devices were definitely killing people. Not a huge number of people, but they were killing people, and Taser just was not admitted. And I really got into that story. That was just before I went to Iraq the second time. Taser did not like that story when it came.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I think that was, I think that story had an impact for years. I think it helped change the conversation around tasers a little bit. Certainly, law enforcement, look, they still got bought, they still got used, but there was an awareness that this is not a zero risk weapon to use on people. We need to be a little more careful. And that's all you can hope for. Some of the Iraq stories, the last story I wrote in 2003, which was a long story that the Times then sort of unfortunately cut down a little bit, but it was this effort to kind of warn people, like, things are not good right now. The Bush administration, this is 6 months after we've had this monumental victory, and the mission accomplished, and there's no more Saddam, but really under the surface things were going badly wrong, and the people in the green zone, for whatever reason, didn't really want to see that, and the people who really saw were people on the ground in the military, right? The guys going outside the wire.
Oh yeah.
And I think the guys, my conclusion was that the guys who knew the most about what were happening were sort of at the battalion level, right? Because if you're a colonel, if you're running a battalion or you're a brigade, and you're actually going out with your soldiers, a considerable amount of this time, generals, it becomes more political, even though they have they have a sort of the 50,000 foot view, and then they're really seeing what's happening in a whole region. But if you're at the, battalion brigade level and getting out there, what's going on. And the reporters knew what was going on, because we were going out, and, certainly in 2003, you could go out with some confidence you were going to, not get kidnapped. By 2004, things had changed. And so,
yeah.
But so, some of those stories from Iraq, I was really trying, we all were, but I was trying to sound an alarm about how things were unstable. And then, of course, by the end of 2003, things really, ISIS, or, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, I guess it was called at the time, had come in. The Shia had come in. The militias had sort of started to come in. Iran had seen that there was an opportunity for them to cause trouble. And it took 5 years to fix Iraq to the extent we did. And then it took another 10 years after that to, solve what happened in Syria with ISIS. So, it was really a disastrous mistake. And the people in the green zone, they were mostly worried about dumb things like who was going to get the contract to rebuild, the Iraqi oil fields, or literally there was, a fair amount of time spent on like the currency and who would, what it would look like. And I was like, guys, like you don't understand, like there's going to be violence, real sectarian violence and real anti-American violence if you don't start figuring out what to do with the Ba'athist and what to do with sort of the tribes in Fallujah, and, just sort of taking this a lot more seriously than you're taking it. And we all paid a, sort of a humongous price for that. So, so some of the Iraq stuff, later, the Madoff stories I enjoyed. There's 6 or 8 pharmaceutical stories that I really like. And then my very last story for the paper, and this was a time when, I was disappointed, because I really thought I'd nailed this dead to rights, and there was never a criminal investigation. But there are these things called long-term acute care hospitals, which you would never have heard of, and hope you never do have to hear about them, because they're essentially, for people who are very sick, sort of too sick to be able to, cared for in a nursing home, but they're not, and they're going to need care for a long time, right? They're not going to get out of the hospital in 3 days. And so this became a very kind of small but lucrative part of Medicare that a couple private companies were able to figure out how to exploit. And I wrote this long story about one of them that opened with a woman. And the way the hospitals would work was you could get a second hospital license essentially inside an existing hospital. So this company Select would come to a hospital that had, for whatever reason was downsizing, and it had an open floor even, and would say, we will occupy the 10th floor under a different license from Medicare, different reimbursement. And when your patients, are ready to get transferred to us, you literally just have to move them up the elevator. So this was something that happened. They could also be freestanding, but they could be inside hospitals. And because there oftentimes weren't doctors on the hospital floor of the LTAC, of the long-term acute care hospital, the level of care was not the same. And so somebody, I think, had a heart attack on an LTAC, and I believe it was in Cincinnati. I'd actually have to go back and look at the story. But so this person having a heart attack and not getting any medical care, inside the hospital, and they call 911. And 911 says, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm in the hospital." I said, "Well, you're in the hospital. We're not able to help people who are in the hospital. Our business at 911 is to get you to the hospital." And it sounds like a joke. It sounds almost Kafkaesque, but the person did die. And so, and the other thing about that story, besides the fact that it was my last story, was that it was a true whistleblower. So in other words, when you're an investigative reporter, people come to you sometimes and they say, I got a story, and oftentimes they're crazy, and sometimes they're not crazy. And usually when they're not crazy, it's because usually they have a financial interest. Sometimes they've even participated in the crime, and then either it's gotten too bad for them to continue to participate, or they realize, hey, I'm going to, I can make some money, by going to prosecutors and getting reimbursement clawbacks or whatever. There's something called QTAM laws, which enable you as a whistleblower to get a portion of what the federal government recovers if it sues on your behalf. Anyway, so there's usually, a lot of times whistleblowers are crazy. Sometimes they just want money. It is very rare to find one who just wants the truth to come out. Just for whatever reason, this person saw something they didn't like, and they fought about it internally, and then usually they quit. Sometimes they get fired for making too much noise. And they're not suing, and they don't want anything. They're just pissed off. And they'll talk. And those are the best whistleblowers and the rarest whistleblowers. And there was one of those people in that story. And so I do remember that. But yeah, no, I love the Times. And this is why, the fact that they sort of turned on me and that journalism has turned on me the way it has, it's upsetting to me. There's nothing I can do about it. I don't think that they're right, obviously, about what they say about me or what they said about me during COVID or my questions about the mRNAs. I think I'm the same reporter I was. I think that they have changed, but it does feel that, it feels like I'm viewed as a traitor, and that's not what I'd like to be.
Yeah, I don't think people outside those circles see you as that. I think they see you as a voice for reason, for logic, independent thought. Obviously now an advocate for First Amendment issues, and I want to talk to you about that a little later when we get there. But going back to Iraq, did they ask for volunteers, or did you just say, hey, if this opportunity comes up, I'd like to be considered, or how did they choose people to go to Iraq at the Times?
Well, so, the first big push, it was experienced correspondence. And then, and then again, people sort of thought the war was over, right? They were pretty quiet May, June, July. And I remember, there was this theory, which was true, which is mostly true, but then became untrue in Iraq, that war zones look a lot more dangerous from the outside than they are from the inside. In other words, Baghdad is the size of Atlanta, right? Like, it's 4 million people. It may even be bigger now. I don't know. But at the time, it's 4 million people, and it's big. Okay. Mm-hmm. So even if one car bomb, was going off, it did not mean that it was going off next to your hotel, right? So, and if that's one car bomb a week, it might seem sort of terrifying, but when you're actually there, it's not a big deal, right? And so things had settled down. And they were looking for people, they were looking for people who would be sort of more junior reporters. I hadn't done any foreign reporting, and I put up my hand, and they were like, yeah, go for it. And everything about it was cool. The drive in from Jordan was cool. And, the first day going out was cool. And it wasn't super dangerous, the first few weeks. It became sort of more dangerous. And I remember going to Fallujah, because you could drive to Fallujah in an unarmed car in September, and then going back in, maybe it was late October, and then it was like, we are not going to be able to come back here unless we're embedded. Like, it's like there are people who do not like us in a meaningful way, and so it was it was intense from the beginning, but it became dangerous in a way that I think actually made it more like what people from the outside perceived it was, right? And then by 2004, it was truly dangerous. It was truly like, you need to be very careful when you're leaving the compound. You need to have people who, have weapons with you, and you're just taking a chance. There's no way around.
In those early days in 2003, when the IED threat hadn't yet become what it become later, just not very long later. But did you have security with you? Did the Times have security with you, or a medic or anything like that?
So the Times had a compound near the Tigris on the opposite side of the river from the Green Zone. Which was reasonably well guarded. And then again, sort of by late 2003, it became fortified. Right. And so, you had to, and it was complicated, right? This was like sort of the job of the bureau chief and the security consultants of the paper. And who are we going to hire? Right. Because you do not want to hire the wrong people to be on the outside wall. Right. But there were, and there were chicanes, and it was a serious, compound certainly by 2004 when I went back. But so, in 2003, at the beginning, we were in unarmored cars, and we'd have a driver and a translator. And sometimes some of the drivers carried pistols. They weren't necessarily supposed to, but they did. But there was not, the feeling was not, we need, 3 guys with AKs every time we go outside, or we need to be in a vehicle that can stand an IED. It was, we're going to go low to the ground. We'll go do our reporting. But there were not, there may have been people out there who were looking to cause harm to Westerners, but there wasn't an organized apparatus. That's what, Austin Tice was in Syria, but I'm trying to remember was his name Nicholas? There was a Japanese guy who was killed in 2004. Yeah. And there was I want to say his name was Nicholas, but there was an American who, got put in an orange jumpsuit and got his head sawed off at some point. I mean, it was clear because of what had happened to Daniel Pearl in Afghanistan in 2001 that there were people out there who were not going to respect the fact that you were a reporter. And you had to be careful. But Pearl had sort of walked into something very dangerous, chasing a story. And so I think the feeling, in Iraq was things are going to be, moderate security will be okay here. And again, that by the end of 2003, it was pretty clear that was not the case.
Since 2003, Bravo Company Manufacturing, founded by a U.S. Marine veteran in Heartland, Wisconsin, has been crafting mission-ready weapon components for professionals who demand reliability. Trusted by U.S. Special Operations, law enforcement, and responsible citizens worldwide, BCM gear is engineered and tested to perform in the most unforgiving environments. Every BCM tool is built and tested as if your life depends on it. Go to Bravo Company USA for more information. Bravo Company, American-made, duty-built. Yeah. Did they give you any training before you went over there? Any medical training or?
Yeah, a little bit. It's more the kind of training that you would get if you were going to, let's say, cover a guerrilla war in Africa, let's say, or in Central America. Because the problem with the Islamists was, if they caught you, they were going to torture you and kill you. Right. Well, it's not about money. It was about like, we're going to make a spectacle of this, and that spectacle will end with your death. And so there wasn't a lot that anybody could do with that. Whereas, if you're captured by the FARC or whatever, and they don't want to kill you. They might want money for you, and they might kill you if it becomes too big a problem. But that was not the goal. So yes, I did get training, and I think it was helpful, but there's just a limit to the usefulness of it.
Yeah. Did you go there? So you went in 2003 and then 2004 again?
Yes. Back in 2004 over the summer. And that was a more mean, that was a very intense experience. And I went and covered the Battle of Najaf, which was not particularly well known.
I was there.
Oh, really?
We were there at the same time, and I was in Najaf, in August of 2004. That's crazy.
Were you with the Marines there?
We went to 27 Cav, so support Army. There were Marine, MARSOC element, sniper element. I had my SEAL sniper element. We had a Polish Grom sniper element, but we had different sectors of the city there. And SF had the cemetery, Special Forces had the cemetery side. And then we all pushed Jaish al-Mahdi militia back to that Imam Ali Mosque in Old Town Center over 2 weeks. I think I was there my team was there for 11 days of that 2-week campaign to retake that city. But we were there at the same time. That's crazy.
We were there at exactly the same time.
Wow.
And in fact, my closest call, a really close call, came outside the mosque the Friday when peace was declared. Because I was walking around.
I was right there. I was probably looking at you.
You might.
I've already had you in my scope.
Well, and I don't really talk about it too much, but like people decided that I was a spy, and the Shia, they like martyrs. They like making martyrs sometimes, and it was very close.
What did they do?
It just wasn't good. And it's funny. It was 20 years ago, and it's 20 years ago. Now it's coming out 21 years ago, and I almost wrote something about it last August. And I could write about anything, right? I did not want to write about it. I just felt I didn't want to write about it. In the end, the only thing I did was I called this guy who was a lieutenant colonel in the CAV, who had sort of come and got me when all was said and done. And I was like, dude, it was 20 years ago. He's like, I know. It's like, I remember it too.
Wow.
And like, that's how I just sort of marked that day.
No kidding.
But
yeah, I was within 100 yards of you.
You probably you were, right, because we had come down from the north side, right? That's where the journalists were, and that's where the Army lines were, and they just there were a couple of days where it was sort of like a bit of artillery and nasty, and I think the Army was concerned they were going to blow up the shrine.
Yes, that became a thing. It's one of the holiest sites in all of Islam. At the time, I wanted to level that thing because you had all of Jaish al-Mahdi militia right where you wanted them essentially, but it happened to be a mosque and off limits.
Yes, it happened to be a mosque. But they did some damage. I want to say, because the south, it would be to the west. The mosque was pretty blown out, and then there was this agreement, right? There was a ceasefire. But the ceasefire could not actually undo the tension of the front.
I remember going to watch those guys we'd just been fighting for the last 11 days leave the mosque, escorted by, I think it was Iraqi National Guard or something like that. They're supposed to turn over their weapons, and off they went to probably fight another day. But it was an interesting time, especially to have been fighting in such, and that was my closest call too. A mortar landed right where me and three of my other guys were in this little courtyard, and we were talking like, this is crazy, kind of like usually we go in at night, we set the time in place of the engagement, we have aircraft overhead, we're making sure that everything is in our favor. But in Najaf, it was just day. It was like World War II, like running through the streets, like the World War II movies that I'd seen, running through the streets in the daytime. There's mortars, there's tanks, there's Abrams. You're calling in aircraft day, night. It was insane. But we were in this little courtyard talking about just as bullets are flying, we're kind of like, this is crazy. Where are we going to go from here? Over that wall. And we jump over this wall, and not 30 seconds after we land on the other side of this thick wall, a mortar lands exactly where we were standing. Not
you think they had your position, or do you think it was locked?
Probably just, I mean, it wasn't off because everything was landing everywhere. It was just like, but I don't think we were being specifically targeted. It was just happened to be one that was landing, and it landed right there. It was crazy.
So what was your role, in that operation? What were you guys doing?
Yeah, it was the first time, I think, I shouldn't say first time, but it was one of the first times that Special Operations had supported such a large-scale conventional push. So there wasn't really a model for it. So I just showed up with my sniper team and talked to Colonel Rainey, who was the battalion commander, 27 Cav at the time. And I said, hey, here's our capabilities. We're here to support. What do you need? And so we could do the sniper mission, and then we could control aircraft and do pre-planned air missions because everybody on the team was a forward air controller. So we had those capabilities. So really we started out however far away that was using the 50 cals, and then we'd work our way in every day, every 2 days we'd push forward, and I'd go back and coordinate with Colonel Rainey and the team and get to move Bradleys and Abrams around, and then push a couple blocks forward and then take up sniper positions and then bring the water, bring the ammo up, and then figure out the next moves, and then the next day push forward again by a block or two. And so we were just there to support 27 Cav and the conventional forces in the area.
I would not be surprised if we walked past each other.
We might have. Yeah, we might have. I know I was close to that last day because I had that mosque was right there. I was across the street from it in an elevated position.
Well, if you saw a bunch of people outside the mosque descending on a guy in a blue shirt.
Oh, wow.
and almost staring him limb from limb. That was me.
Well, I didn't see that, but if I had, I don't know, I probably would have helped you out.
Yeah, I don't know what you could have. I would, it probably would have made it worse. No, it was quite. So that was, and that was a very intense, obviously, moment in my life, and it definitely led into The Faithful Spy. That book could not have been written without being in Iraq, and I think without sort of that day. I mentioned these times. There's maybe the most intense story I wrote at the Times came 2 days after that. It was a front page story, and the first line in it is, "The wild dogs of Najaf ate well last night, or ate well this week." Because I'm sure you saw they were eating corpses.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. The first line.
It's funny. Fallujah rightly got all the attention because it was much bigger and more American style, and it was a battle that sort of shaped the war. But that was not a joke. What was happening where we were?
Yeah, that was crazy. That was crazy. My first time doing something like that, and the first time for a lot of us to do something like that. But that's just wild that we were within, I'm sure, 100 yards of each other on that last day. Gosh, that is crazy. Well, so that leads to The Faithful Spy. And, I didn't know there was such a direct connection. I knew there was the Iraq connection to here, but I didn't know that it was such a visceral, primal, emotional experience, which now makes sense because when you read this book, there's that thing, that intangible that differentiates something that's good from something that's great. And that's that heart. And this book has heart. The character has heart. The story has heart, which elevates it above the fray. And it did at the time. That's why you broke through with this book. And now I know, because there's that emotional component to it that I wasn't aware of till just now. So that was 2004. That was August 2004. This book comes out in 2006. When do you start writing this? Or did you know at the time that you wanted to write novels eventually?
I even before I went to Iraq, I was thinking, is there I was actually thinking about with my brother, is there a screenplay to do about, sort of somebody inside Al-Qaeda? I'm sure we were not the only wannabe screenwriters, and he was in LA, and that was really his, he really wanted to be a screenwriter. I was a reporter, and I liked working with him, and I thought it'd be kind of fun, but it wasn't my, mission in life. And so we had been sort of noodling around with stuff, but nothing, we hadn't unlocked it in any, meaningful way. And then I guess when I came back in 2004, I said to him, look, I really want to write this book. And when I was at the time, and it may have been after 2003, I said, I want to write the book. And I started writing something and was able to sell it on a outline and a few chapters to Random House. I would have to go back and look at the dates, whether it was before I went to Iraq the second time or after. But in any case, the meat of the book I wrote after I came back from Iraq the second time. And I wasn't married, I didn't have kids, so even though I was working full time, and I just had time, and I really wanted to write that book. I really wanted to write the book. And so, I wrote it in 2006, and it got nice attention. Didn't get it didn't become like a huge bestseller, but it got, respectful reviews and nice attention. And then in 2007, it was named as a finalist for the Edgar Award, which is was a pretty good award.
Yeah.
And the other finalists included that year Gillian Flynn, who'd written a book called Sharp Objects. That was before Gone Girl, I read Sharp Objects, and I thought this book's going to win. I did not. This is not like me being. I'm not like a humble guy by nature. Like, this is not me being fake humble. I thought that Sharp Objects was going to win. It's also more of a traditional suspense novel. A Faithful Spy is really a thriller, an espionage thriller. And John Hart, who became a huge bestseller with these sort of Southern Gothic thrillers, was also a finalist that year, and I won. And it was pretty exciting. But that didn't really change things as meaningfully. The next year, the paperback, which is right up in front of you, came out, and I woke up, and and the Times had it as their number one bestseller its first week out. And and I thought, you know what? It's possible that I'm not going to be a reporter that much longer when I saw that. And to this day, I don't know how they did that. I don't know how, Random House did that. And it sort of was sad for me because later books, they never, the sales trajectory, look, the books all sold fine, but, the sales trajectory was sort of a slow burn down from the first one. And I don't know if that's just because Wells was so much a character of his time. I don't know if there's something about, as you say, the first one does have this heart and it has this romance in it that is real. I mean, it's passion at a distance, but it's real. I don't know whether I think there's an acidity in the books a little bit. I think there's a darkness in them that in some more commercial thrillers you don't get. Not that there's not violence in a Vince Flynn book or Silva, but there's a real cynicism in some of the later Wells novels. And Wells does this thing every time, and Schaefer's in there, but you do sort of feel like the world is bigger than they are, I think, and that whatever good they're doing, it's not really going to last. And I think that may not be what what a lot of spy thriller readers want necessarily in the more commercial side. But that's just, that was me. That was me, and that was Wells, and I was not going to write around that. And to their credit, Putnam did not try, because Putnam then took the contract for Random House. They did not try to make me. And so, look, the books are good. I am proud of them. I wish that they had all sold and had the impact of The Faithful Spy. But if there was a more commercial way to do that, I didn't know what that was, if that makes sense.
It does, but you're also in a time of change. So 2006, we don't yet have, I don't think we have Facebook yet. I forget exactly when Facebook comes out, but it comes out like right around then, maybe like just after that, I think. Then Instagram, then you don't have all of those things having the impact that they have now or would have 4 years later, certainly 10 years later. So you're still at this time where authors have a website. And there's not yet podcasts, or certainly there's not podcasts the way they are now. I don't think there was a podcast in 2006. Maybe there was, but no one really knew about them if there were. But no, I don't think there were any at all. We don't even have the iPhone, I think, comes out in 2007.
iPhone is 07. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So we don't have that yet, meaning we're still in this 80s, 90s paradigm where entertainment is movies, television, radio, books. Yep. And entertainment would then become these devices that we carry around that are meant to distract us and manipulate us, our thoughts and behaviors. So you're at this time, I think that may have something to do with it if you're looking at it, from up here, but you're at this time of change where all of those other distractions did not yet exist when The Faithful Spy comes out and when The Ghost War comes out and The Silent Man comes out, and then things start to shift.
And do you think so? It's both the competitive landscape and the promotional landscape is more difficult. And I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to ask too much about your sales or has it gotten harder or, but I mean, do you feel like it? Because again, I've not written a novel I mean, I haven't read a Wells novel in 7 years, and my last non-Wells novel was 4 years ago. And, that was in the middle of COVID, and it was a weird, very weird topic. Do you feel like things have changed?
It is a very difficult time to be an author because you are in competition with all of those things that I just mentioned. And for a lot of us like us growing up, I wanted to be an author from my earliest days. I wanted to be a SEAL and I wanted to be an author. I knew I had to be a SEAL first and then write. But my vision of being an author is that I could go to the mountains, write in a cabin, send it to New York. Maybe I do a Sunday morning show and then I go back to writing the next one. And then I step into this space in 2018. That's when my first novel was published. And I take a look at what I consider essentially the battle space, or what I would have considered the battle space downrange. And I realize, oh, this has shifted. This is not 1985. It's not 1995. It's not even 2005. You are now in competition with all these other distractions, essentially with big tech algorithms that are meant to keep people from buying this book and reading this book. So what do I do? Okay, how do I capitalize on momentum? How do I adapt to a changing environment? What are the gaps in the enemy's defenses? Okay, if I want to have that financial success and support my family in the way that I envisioned back in the 80s and 90s, then I'm going to have to adapt to this environment and do things other than just write. And everything else that I do other than write is going to have to be at that same level, have that same quality. I'm going to have to put the same amount of effort into everything, whether it's a post on X, then Twitter, Instagram, or it's a blog post, or it's a podcast, or whatever it might be. They all have to be at this level because all of those things are supporting efforts to the main effort, which is the book. So if you're not going to do that as an author, it is very difficult, I think, unless you're an outlier. Of course, there are outliers that are going to break through with like a 50 Shades of Grey or something like that, or a Twilight or something like that. But if you are not those outliers, you're going to have to put in a lot more effort than authors did as far as promotion goes in the 80s and 90s.
Do you feel like, for example, this podcast or whatever else you might do, are those generating income for you, or is that really just to promote the book?
It is a way to connect with an audience more than anything else. And for me, that is very important because I was getting these questions on Instagram and Twitter, X, that didn't lend themselves to a one sentence response. And I don't think anyone's mind has ever been changed on a thread on X or on Instagram. It certainly wasn't a good use of my time. Rather, I wanted to provide something of value so that when the book comes out, then you've established this relationship and it's genuine because I care so much about this readership and want to continue to grow it and want people to be readers, whether it's me or someone else. I want people to read books because I think makes us a more informed citizenry, which is only better for the country and the future of humanity if you want to take it that far. So for me, it's about connecting with that audience. And yeah, the podcast was profitable out of the gate, but that wasn't the main reason for it. The main reason for it was to be able to answer those questions and interview people. I'm having conversations with people all the time anyway, and I thought I know all these interesting people. Why don't I just record some of these conversations I'm having anyway? And so I did that. I don't know how long I'll be able to keep doing this because now I have all these other writing projects. And I have to figure out a way to get more efficient with my time. So we'll see what happens in the future. But it's been profitable from the get-go. But that's not the reason that I do it. Yeah. Are
you doing any screenwriting now? Or is that?
I am. I'm going to ask you about your experience at 24 in a moment. But out of the gate, I was involved. I was an executive producer, and it wasn't just in name only. For the first show that came out in 2022 with Chris Pratt, I optioned it right out of the gate before it was even published. And I actually wanted Chris Pratt, as I was writing, I envisioned him playing the role of my character because I wanted somebody who hadn't done that before. And he hadn't been in Jurassic World yet, hadn't been in Guardians of the Galaxy. He'd been in Parks and Rec. I was thinking of a Tom Hanks type character, the bosom buddies from the 80s, all the comedies from the 80s. And then he takes a risk with Philadelphia in early 90s. And then essentially Tom Hanks can do whatever he wants. And I thought, well, who's that guy for this generation? And this book is very dark. I'm going to need a readership and a viewership to connect with him and like him already as a person outside of this because he's going to need to do some dark things here and I don't want to lose that audience. So I thought Chris Pratt's my guy. And I didn't know him at the time. And then a buddy of mine, it turned out, actually knew him and gave him the book right before it came out and he optioned it out of the gate. But the first one I worked on with the showrunner where I'm just learning. And I'm always always a student, no matter what I'm doing, whether it's student of warfare or writing, whatever it is, I'm a student always. And so I was just there kind of to help, but I'm learning with that first pilot. And then Chris Pratt takes it out with Antoine Fuqua, the director and the showrunner, and then they sell it. It goes to Amazon. Then it gets some influx of cash in order to put the writing room together. And I jump in there from time to time, but I edit almost every day the things coming out of the writer's room. And I send those back every day. And I wasn't involved in the casting, but then I have a cameo. I'm on set as much as I can be on set. So I'm just learning all the departments, learning that side of the house. And then for this next one, we have a spinoff that comes out in August called Dark Wolf. That one, now I'm executive producer also, but now I'm a writer writing the finale with the showrunner. And I'm involved in all the casting, and I'm involved in every part of the process. And I talk to the showrunner every day. And then the True Believer, which we're filming right now, which is my second book, that one should come out the next year when we're done, but we're in the middle of filming it right now. And I'm writing the pilot, or the first episode to that one. So I'm very, very involved. And I'm learning a lot, and I like it because that's, as you know, it's a team doing that. And there's all sorts of factors you can't control. And there are all sorts of left and right limits, from budgets to whatever else you have to consider. Time, obviously, because you're telling the story in 7 or 8 1-hour episodes. With the books, there's as you know, there's nothing you can't do in a book. There's no financial limitations. There's no left and right limits, no length limit, none of that stuff. You can do whatever you want. So I like having the two, because this is pure, and the show is a group effort. And so I don't get too wrapped around like, that changed, this changed. For me, hey, that's great. I'm fine. That's learning. It's not my only thing. Every book is the best I could possibly make it at that time. And I want each one to get better, obviously. And I think they have thus far. But the screenwriting is interesting because it's a team effort.
Yep. You're exactly right. I mean, a book is yours, and it's as good or as bad as you can make it. And I mean, I've been involved in bits in Hollywood here and there, and I mean, look, there's a few people, right? If you're J.J. Abrams, you get what you want, and it's going to look exactly like you want it to look. But for almost everybody else, there's compromises involved. As you say, compromises with, well, the actor gets to, have a say. The director has a say. The other writers have a say. This has a say because they're cutting the checks, right? So you have to be willing to do that. I actually, that part I did not mind and do not mind. It's really just that I think there's something that really great screenplays have that, or screenplays that get made have, that is hard to describe. And there's like 100 writers who can do it in the world. And maybe it's something that I would have been able to do if I'd set my mind to it entirely. But I don't think I ever reached that level. I still wrote scripts that were fine and could have gotten made, but there's something about the ones that do get made where they just pop off the page in this way that's hard to describe. And it may be the dialogue too, because one of the things that I always thought about as a novelist is, look, as a novelist, you can succeed and write a great novel in any number of ways, right? Your novel can have great descriptions. It can have great language. It can have great dialogue. It can have, a truly unexpected plot twist. It can capture a small world or a big world. There's so many different things you can do as a novelist. But if you're a screenwriter, if you can't get dialogue right, really right, you can't succeed. And if you can get it really right, you have a huge advantage. And I mean, I think my dialogue was good, but it isn't that magic that some people have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting. Did you write some sort of an adaptation for Faithful Spy at all, or there's feature or series?
So my joke about it, it's not really, the adaptation for Faithful Spy is Homeland.
I know. I was going to ask you about that too.
Yes. So I mean, look, there's no way not to read The Faithful Spy and see the first season of Homeland and not understand that there are similarities there. In addition to which, I knew the guys because it's 24. And in addition to which, they named Saul Berenson after me. Right? That's, Mandy Patinkin's character is Saul Berenson. What was tricky was, I mean, there's copyright and intellectual property issues, and then there's the issue of much overlap is there really? I will say one thing that is different and that is very important. Okay, both the Faithful Spy and Homeland have this triangle of characters, right? They have, Wells is Brody, Carrie is Deborah Exley, and Berenson is Schaefer, right? In the Faithful Spy, nobody believes in Wells except Exley, right? And she stands by. In Homeland, in that first season, everyone believes in Brody except Carrie, and Carrie still loves you. And that is a more subtle and much more sort of artistic move to make. It's a much more challenging move to make, right? Because you have this woman who is falling for him, even though she knows he's a bad guy, right? And or that he's been turned, or that that she can't really trust him. And so that's a much more sort of grown-up conception than the Faithful Spy. And the Faithful Spy actually just trusts that Wells is a good guy and loves him. And so those guys figured that out, and that was, you can say that's what made season 1 of Homeland. That said, should Homeland, have credits on it that say from the Faithful Spy? Well, you can read the book. The problem for them was they had already bought some source material, so it would get very complicated for them if it was going to be adapted from two different things. But I will tell you, they certainly knew about the Faithful Spy. Sure.
Interesting.
So,
Maybe take inspiration.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't want it to sound like I hope it doesn't sound like my feelings about it are, they're complicated, but they're not really negative, right? Yeah. Again, like I wound up writing 12 of these books. The Wells universe went to a different place. Homeland was what it was. I think the first season was the best season. But when you really look, there's Easter eggs all over Homeland.
Oh, well, kind of related to that then is when you go out to LA, and I think it was 2010 you go out there, and one of the guys that was doing 24 had read The Faithful Spy, maybe a couple of the others by then, and wants to bring you on board, I think as a consultant, and you go out there for about a month, and you're part of the writer's room for that whole time. And what was that experience like for you?
I mean, it's fantastic. Like, that's the thing. Like, those guys were really smart. They worked hard. They were now, I think, in season 7 of 24. And so it was, they were kind of low on ideas. Like, I mean, they've been through a lot, right? There's a lot of plot. And that was one thing that definitely, that experience taught me, is that action on TV burns plot, right? There's just, you just have to think of a lot of different twists, even more in some ways than a movie. Because in a movie, you can have 3 or 4 extended action sequences. That's most of the movie, right? And if if you have some, whether it's Chris Pratt or George Clooney, if you have some actor who can, do a ton with his face, and, you don't need that much dialogue necessarily. It has to be good dialogue, but on TV, it's a different animal. It's a real beast for plot. And the other thing was, so they were up in Chatsworth. That's where the show was filmed. And it was definitely sort of pre-Me Too era, even though it's 2010. I mean, it was basically all guys in the room, all middle-aged white guys who were, they were successful. They all took it seriously, but there were jokes made that probably would not get made now in that room.
They made a great show. They made a great show.
And, that show had cultural resonance for most of a decade. It did. Yeah. You could say it justified torture. You could say it's the reason Barack Obama got elected. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it had a black president. It was a cultural milestone.
Yeah. Yeah, it really was. Did you ever meet Vince Flynn? I think he did a consultancy on that for a little bit. Did you get to meet him ever?
Did not. It was a year or two before. That was the thing. I mean, he obviously was a whole different level of success. But yeah, they brought him in, and I think he used to say that some of it's, of course, he's obviously been dead for a long time now, unfortunately. But yeah, I remember he.
Interesting. What was it like in that room? Because you're now there, and you have to think this is, like you said, season 7 or 8, somewhere in there, and you're sitting around the table in this writer's room. You have to think up the next season, the next ticking clock, and like how many ticking clocks can you have? How many 24 hours can you have with this ticking clock? So what is that? Could you sense, was there tension? Was there stress built off this, hey, we have this success, and now we got to figure out another ticking clock?
Yes, and those guys they were proud of the show. They made a ton of money on the show. That was another thing. I mean, I'm sure, you're doing quite well on your TV stuff or your streaming stuff, but like that was the last era of like, you could truly make a fortune from a successful TV show by itself, right? And so, I mean, I do remember a couple times of pitching stuff that I thought was really good, and they're like, "Yeah, we did that." You
wanted him to smile. Ago. You wanted him to smile, right?
What's that?
You wanted him to smile.
I wanted him to smile. And it was like, no, he's never going to smile. He's never going to break character. And Kiefer too. I mean, like, I should never met Kiefer, but like, he was clearly, he was the perfect guy for that part, and the show would not have succeeded. There's this alchemy, right? That as a writer, you have to respect that the show, if it's going to work, your writing is going to be important, but having the actor who somehow fits the role perfectly is going to be even more important.
Yeah, I think it was right before September 11th. I remember being in Japan, and I got like I don't know, it was in a magazine. It was something in our barracks. It was sitting there. We were just temporarily there doing some sort of an exercise. And I picked up, like, it was Entertainment Weekly or something. And I think that's the first time that I heard about 24. And I saw a thing, and it had 3, I believe this is true. Now, of course, you can check now on conflation and memory, and it's been a year or two. I think it had 24, Alias, and then one other show that didn't make it that was called The Agency or the CIA or something like that. I think there were kind of 3 competing shows that were all coming out in the fall of 2001, I believe.
Well, I mean, that's interesting. I didn't realize that the first season, well, that would make sense. It was either 2001 or 2002, right? But clearly it was 2001. The timing was perfect.
Yeah, I mean, the timing.
24 was so important. The New Yorker wrote a whole, which is not, they would consider 24 beneath them, right? They wrote a huge story about it because of its cultural impact. It really, I mean, I do think that it encouraged torture, and I don't know whether you ever saw anything that you didn't like when you were, in Iraq, whether you, I don't know if you ever were at Abu Ghraib for any reason, or, obviously you were aware of it, but it's funny to think now, I feel like I'm older now, and I understand like due process better now. I understand why it's not a good idea to ever go down that road, except, I guess, in the absolute most exigent circumstances. Like literally the bomb is about to blow up and destroy New York City, right? But it becomes very easy to justify stuff that later gives you a bad feeling in your stomach when you go down that road.
Yeah, you really have to maintain that moral high ground. And I recognized that early on. I don't know where that comes from, but I talked to my guys about it before we went down range. I incorporated it into the training because I didn't want the first time that, let's say, a 20, 21, 23, 25-year-old person is faced with this dilemma. I don't want that to be the first time that they're thinking about it down range. I want them to have thought about it beforehand. And maintaining that moral high ground is sometimes the only thing that differentiates us from the enemy. So maintaining that is of the utmost importance. So I don't know where that came from, but certainly the influence of popular culture throughout history is exemplified by that decade of 24. And I wouldn't use encouraged torture, but maybe justifies, because it does have this cultural resonance, and you're rooting for Kiefer Sutherland, and he's the good guy, and here's what he's doing, and that's just the natural thing. Of course, you're going to do that to save the city or the world or whatever he's doing that season. So it's interesting. The power of popular culture. Maybe it was more powerful before we had these devices in our pockets with big tech manipulating us with every swish of the swipe, I guess. But it certainly was back then still. So yeah, it's an interesting time, but yeah, what a great run that show had. And I also want to ask you, you said you sold The Faithful Spy on an outline in a couple of chapters, which for those listening or watching is, from my understanding, is unusual. Usually on the fiction side of the house, you have to have the product, you have to have the manuscript, and a nonfiction you can sell, like if you're a politician or a baseball player or a general or something like that, you can, sell an outline and go from there on the nonfiction side. But usually you have to have the manuscript done. But you got it done with just a few chapters in an outline.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd been at the Times, or I was at the Times, and I'd been in Iraq, and that helped. And I had a pretty clear view of what the book was going to be, and they just went for it. It's funny because I'd been thinking, look, I want this to be sort of halfway between Tom Clancy and John le Carré. And in the letter that the editor sent to my agent, he said, we see this as sort of between Clancy and le Carré. And I was like, I guess I did accomplish at least that. And I will tell you, and I know it's already past 4, and my kids are about to come home from school, and we haven't talked about COVID or anything like that, which is fine. I'm happy not to talk about any of that. This has been great, actually, because it's been about, stuff from a while ago. But the end of The Faithful Spy was not supposed to have an epilogue. And so, look, the book has now been out for almost 20 years. I will spoil the ending by letting people know that he is in, he's in Times Square at the end, and he gets shot by the bad guy, and he's already been infected with plague. It's a little over the top, but I think it works in the moment.
It works. It's fantastic.
And so he, the last moment is him going to black. Goes to black. He collapses. And I intended to end it there. I intended the book to end with Wells dying. I was really thinking about the end of The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, where Lemus gets shot at the wall. And my editor, this guy named Mark Tavani, a really good editor, said to me, look, you want to kill him? I don't think you should kill him, but you can kill him. He said, but this was pre-Sopranos, by the way. It was pre that, that cut to black in the Sopranos. And somebody should have said this to Gandolfini, he said, look, if you're going to kill him, you need to make it clear. You can't end on the same day. You have to write a funeral. You got to write some kind of scene. And I think he did that, my editor, Tavani, knowing that I wasn't going to be able to do that the character was just too close to me. He was too much of sort of my hero projection or whatever. And I couldn't. And so instead of ending there, it ends with him basically having a dream that he's dying, and then he doesn't die and he wakes up. And that really changed my career, changed my life. Because I wrote 12 of these books and left the Times, and again, we will not talk about COVID. We will not talk about Tell Your Children, but it gave me the financial freedom and flexibility and, in sort of outsider perspective to take these positions that, I certainly couldn't have done if I'd been at the New York Times. And so, I guess I owe Mark Tavani a thank you.
Oh, I'm glad you look at it that way. I have some more other questions, but I know you have to get to the kids. But let me just ask you one more, because I only got through one page of my 3 pages of questions for you. But I've had such a great time talking to you. I lost track of time too, which I rarely do. But so it's been wonderful to talk to you. All right. We'll do a part 2. That'd be amazing. I'd love that. Absolutely love that. But since we're on John Wells here, so your second book right here, The Ghost War, it's a U.S.-China situation right here. And I read that you were in Tiananmen Square in 1988 before the protests, which would put you in high school at the time. So I have to ask, what were you doing in China back then? I was there in 93, which is still pretty young, but what were you doing there in 1988?
That's really funny that you're. I don't know where that was, but no. So I was. I mean, my mother loved to travel, and that was she took me and my brother. We went to Beijing, we went to Xi'an, and we went to Hong Kong in the summer of '88, and it was a wild experience. China was so poor then. I was in, Czechoslovakia when it was Czechoslovakia before the fall of the wall. And I remember being in East Germany, and somehow, I think this have been 87, maybe, we've gotten the train schedules a little confused. And so we needed to get to one of the checkpoints before I think they closed for the night, whatever it was. We were sort of cutting it close. But so that was a similar thing in '88. That's why I was in China, and I've only been back to China one time since then in 2006, and I would like to go back, but I'm not sure that they'd be that interested in having me back. It's interesting, like Russia, I definitely will not go to because I'm not convinced that they'd let me out. They'd let me in, but I'm not convinced they'd let me out. And China. I think it would be okay, but without some kind of semi-official assurance, I'd be a little wary of going.
Yeah, same thing. Luckily, I got to China in '93, and I went to Moscow in '93 as well. Went to Ukraine in '93 before my time in the military, and I go back to that when I'm writing the novels now, and remember what it was like to be in Moscow in December. Remember how it felt. Remember the architecture. Remember the food. How it was the nicest hotel. The food was like a potato type of a soup thing. And I remember in China at the time. I remember the bugs in the rice, and I remember all of that. And I worked that into the novels now. But thank you so much for spending this time. I'll let you get to the kids. I mean, this has been such a treat for me to be able to talk with you for a bit. And I really thank you.
And me too. And I really cannot believe we were both in, near the shrine at the same time on the same day. That is nuts.
That is crazy.
That is really something.
Amazing.
But one day, where are you based?
We're in Park City, Utah.
Oh, you're kind of, one day I'll get out there, I hope, and we can have a high west, and
there you go.
I will tell you. I'll tell you the rest of that story, and you might actually have seen me on your scope at some point.
Wow, it's possible. And if you ever need anything, please reach out. And hopefully, we can do this again and talk about some other things. And then also, do you have any plans, perhaps, to bring John Wells back or to write some future novels, or what's that look like?
I would like to. That's all I could say. I haven't. I mean, there was a period a couple of years ago when I thought I actually would, and then the Substack sort of took off, and I just have not had time to do it. But I almost feel like I owe readers one more book, because the 12th book, The Deceivers, ends on it ends kind of in the middle of a story, and I wouldn't have to necessarily spend a lot of time wrapping that up, but I think if you've spent 100 hours or whatever it is reading these books, I owe you a little bit more than that. And there are definitely people who would like to see it, but I just haven't done it. And so, every year that goes by, it's like, am I actually going to do it? So,
yeah. Amazing. Well, I hope you do. And looking forward to linking up in person and sharing a High West, and I'll link to Substack and your website and all that stuff here in show notes. But thank you again. I also want to thank you for being such a strong voice for the First Amendment, and being such an independent voice out there, unafraid. It's an incredible example for all. So thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. And let's do a part 2 at some point. I'd love that.
Awesome. We'll make it happen for sure. Take care, and hopefully I'll see you in person soon.
Thanks.
Take care.
This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Cry Havoc. From New York Times #1 bestselling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reese thriller. Order now.
Watch a Cry Havoc teaser here, or watch another episode of the podcast here.